Welcome to the deep dive. Now, if you're thinking about your financial future, especially here in India, you've definitely come across fixed deposits, FDs. They're often seen as the absolute bedrock of safe investing, aren't they?
They really are. It's almost the default setting for a lot of people's savings.
Exactly. But what if that's safety? What if it isn't actually helping you grow your wealth? What if maybe it's doing the opposite? Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is exactly that contrast. You have this thing everyone thinks is incredibly safe, like foundational, but when you dig into it, well, it often falls short in building real wealth. FDs do offer that nominal safety. Your principal amount is generally secure.
Sure.
But our deep dive today is going to show how these persistent economic forces can really chip away at any real growth in your actual purchasing power.
And that's really our mission today, isn't it? To take a hard look at that traditional story around FDs. We're using some solid analysis to show you how things like inflation, the falling rupee, and even soaring medical costs can silently erode your savings.
It's a crucial perspective shift.
It really is. You might be surprised by what we find. So let's get into this core idea first. The difference between the return you see advertised and what you actually get in your pocket, so to speak. Can you break that down?
Absolutely. It's fundamental. So you look at an FD offer and you see the nominal rate of return. Maybe Unity Small Finance Bank is offering 8.60%, or your big bank is offering, say, 7.00%. Looks okay on paper.
Right.
But the real rate of return, that's the key. It's what's left after you account for inflation. It tells you how much your actual purchasing power has increased. Can you buy more stuff with your money? That's the real measure of wealth growth.
And I guess taxes play a role there, too.
Oh, definitely. Taxes are another layer that, comes off the top of those nominal returns. So the actual amount you keep, your net profit, is even lower. It gives you a much more, let's say, sober picture.
Okay, so focusing on inflation then. How does India's specific inflation situation impact these FD returns?
It's a massive factor. India's inflation, measured by the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, it tends to be quite, volatile. For the fiscal year 2024-25, the average was around 4.6%.
Okay.
But look at more recent data like November 2024, and the provisional figure was higher, up at 5.48%. And if you zoom out, the long-term average, say from 2015 to 2024, it's been hovering around 5%.
So it bounces around a bit.
Exactly. And the problem for FDs is their rates are fixed. They can't react if inflation suddenly spikes. So a rate that looked decent might suddenly mean your real return drops to near zero or even goes negative.
You mentioned the overall CPI, but I remember reading something about food inflation being particularly high. Does that change the picture for, everyday expenses?
It absolutely does, and it's a really critical point. The Consumer Food Price Index, the CFPI, hit 9.04% in November 2024. That's way higher than the general CPI at 5.48% for that same month.
Wow, nearly double.
Yeah. And for most households in India, food is a huge chunk of the budget, right? So even if your FD is on paper, beating the headline inflation rate, if the cost of your groceries is rising at 9%, your actual ability to afford daily necessities is shrinking. The general CPI real return can sometimes look better than the reality feels in your wallet.
That makes sense. It can feel a bit theoretical, though. Could you walk us through some actual numbers? What do these real returns look like in practice for FDs? Here's where it gets really interesting.
Sure, let's crunch some numbers based on the data.
Okay.
Scenario 1. Let's be optimistic. You get the highest rate out there, say that 8.60% from Unity. Against average recent inflation of 4.6%, your real return is about 3.82%.
Okay, positive, but not huge.
Not huge. Scenario 2, more typical. A major bank FD at 7.00%. Now, pit that against that higher recent inflation of 5.48%. Your real return, it drops to just 1.44%.
Oof, barely keeping pace.
Barely. Scenario 3, the longer view. Same 7.00% FD, but against the long-term average inflation of 5%, you're looking at a real return of about 1.90%.
It's a bit pretty low.
Very low. And scenario 4, even for senior citizens who often get better rates, say a top rate of 9.10%, against that 4.6% average inflation, the real return is around 4.30%.
So looking at all those, it's kind of stark, isn't it? The actual gain in purchasing power is much smaller than the headline numbers suggest.
Exactly. That's the core takeaway. Even in the best case scenarios, the real returns are modest. And very often, especially once you factor in taxes, they become tiny, barely positive, or actually negative. Your money is effectively treading water, or worse, sinking slowly in terms of what it can buy.
Okay, so that's inflation working way domestically. But let's pivot to another, maybe less obvious force.
Yeah.
the weakening Indian rupee. How does that impact our wealth beyond just local prices?
That's a really crucial piece of the puzzle, often overlooked. Rupee depreciation basically means, over time, you need more rupees to buy $1 or other major currencies.
Right.
This directly hits the international purchasing power of your savings held in rupees. Think about anything imported electronics, fuel, or maybe foreign travel, or sending your kids abroad for education.
So it makes those things more expensive in rupee terms.
Precisely. And the historical trend is quite striking. Back in the late 40s, it was around 3.3 rupees to the dollar. By 1967, after devaluation, it was 7.50. Fast forward through the 90s crisis, past 2014 when it was around 62, to today where it's well over 80, maybe heading towards 86 or 87 rupees per dollar soon.
That's a massive, relentless slide over decades. What's driving that?
It's a mix of things, really. Historically, you had economic issues, wars in 62 and 65, the oil shock in 73, the big fiscal crisis in the early 90s. More recently, it's things like trade deficits, because we import a lot, capital flowing out of the country sometimes, plus general global economic jitters. The key point isn't just one cause, but that it's a persistent structural feature. It's not likely to just reverse course dramatically.
So we need to plan for it continuing, essentially.
Yes, absolutely, especially for any long-term goals that have an international component. And FDs, being purely rupee-based with no currency hedge, are fully exposed to this erosion.
Can you give us a concrete example of this hidden cost? How does it actually bite?
Sure. Let's say you want to buy a new laptop and it costs $1,000 US. If the exchange rate moves from, say, 80 rupees to the dollar to 85 rupees to the dollar,
Okay.
that same $1,000 laptop now costs you 85,000 rupees instead of 80,000 rupees. Your FD might have earned you some interest in rupees, maybe it even beat domestic inflation slightly, but that gain is wiped out, and then some, by the currency depreciation when you go to buy that imported item.
So your global buying power shrinks, even if your rupee amount grows a bit.
Exactly. It tangibly affects your lifestyle choices and ability to afford things in our interconnected world.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's tackle something the source highlights as really critical, maybe even alarming medical inflation. Why is this specific cost increase such a big deal?
This one is genuinely concerning because the numbers are so high. We're talking about healthcare costs in India rising at roughly 12% to 14% per year. Some estimates put the average over the last few years at 10-12%, but projections for 2025 are hitting that 14% mark.
14%. Compared to general inflation of what, 4 or 5%?
Exactly. It's 2 to 3 times faster than the overall cost of living increase. India's medical inflation is actually among the highest globally right now.
Why so high?
Well, it's driven by things like better but more expensive medical technology, people using more healthcare services, and unfortunately, the rise of chronic diseases like diabetes and heart conditions.
And we feel this directly in things like insurance premiums, right?
Absolutely. Health insurance premiums shot up by an average of 15-20% in 2024 alone. That's a direct hit to the household budget.
So faced with those kinds of numbers, 12-14%, how do FDs even begin to measure up? It seems impossible.
They don't, frankly. The inadequacy is stark. Even the absolute best FD rates, like that 8.60% or the 9.10% for senior citizens, they fall way short of 14% medical inflation.
So what does that mean in real terms?
It means your savings are actively losing value against the cost of future healthcare. If costs rise by 14% and your money only grows by, say, 8.6%, you're losing about 5% of your healthcare purchasing power every single year.
Wow.
Think about that compounding over time. It's not just about affording less discretionary stuff. It's about potentially not being able to afford necessary life-saving treatments or decent care as you get older.
Right.
It's a silent crisis brewing for retirement planning.
And I imagine it's even worse for older people or those with health issues already.
Much worse. They face not only the highest healthcare cost increases, but also potentially huge hikes in their insurance premiums, sometimes up to 50% increases, making essential coverage incredibly expensive or even unaffordable.
Okay, so let's try and bring all these threads together. We've got general inflation, the falling rupee, and this really high medical inflation. What's the final verdict on FDs when you consider all these forces? So what does this all mean?
It means that the nominal returns you see on FDs are systematically being outrun by the real-world cost increases and currency effects. You know, we talk about compounding wealth.
Yeah, interest on interest.
Right. But true compounding is about growing your purchasing power consistently over time. If your real rate of return after inflation and depreciation is hovering around zero or worse, negative, Your wealth isn't compounding, it's stagnating, or it's actually shrinking in real terms.
Which leads us back to that idea you mentioned earlier, the safety trap.
Precisely. The feeling of safety you get from seeing your principal amount unchanged or growing slightly in nominal terms, it masks the reality that the actual value, the purchasing power, is eroding.
Can you illustrate that trap?
Yeah, imagine, hypothetically, your FD delivers a consistent negative 1% real return each year. Doesn't sound like much, maybe. But compound that over 10 years, and you've lost roughly 10% of your initial capital's buying power. You have more rupees, maybe, but they buy significantly less.
So relying on them for long-term goals.
It's not just suboptimal, it's actually harmful. It can lead to a guaranteed decline in your real wealth over time. Instead of compounding wealth for many people holding FDs long-term, it's effectively compounding misfortune.
So after digging into all this, what's the fundamental conclusion about fixed deposits in India for long-term wealth?
I think the conclusion is pretty clear. They are, in essence, a potential safety trap. Your capital feels safe, but its purchasing power is likely decreasing. They are fundamentally inadequate for genuine long-term wealth creation because they just don't keep pace with the combined forces of inflation, general, and especially medical and rupee depreciation.
Which means people really need to reconsider their approach.
Absolutely. This raises an important question. People need to shift their mindset. It's less about just preserving the nominal amount of rupees and more about focusing on actually growing your real purchasing power.
Beyond the familiar territory of FDs.
Exactly. Exploring other investment options that have the potential for higher growth and can maybe offer better protection against inflation and currency movements.
So it leaves us with a crucial thought, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Really consider what security actually means for your financial future in today's economy. Is it just seeing the same rupee number? Or is it ensuring that money can buy you what you need tomorrow and years from now? How will the choices you make today affect that future purchasing power? Something to definitely mull over. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.